All right, so Zelensky at the White House. It started with handshakes,
Yeah.
but ended with, well, let's just say things got a little heated. Everyone's talking about this footage.
Yeah.
And you sent us a ton of sources on it, so let's dive in and try to figure out what exactly happened between Zelensky and Trump. Why does this even matter? And what does it tell us about this whole global power struggle?
Yeah.
Ukraine, the U.S., all of it.
It really is remarkable how quickly a diplomatic meeting, something that's usually very controlled, became this global incident that everyone saw on live TV.
Right, and the sources you share, they really capture all the different perspectives on this. We've got news reports, expert analysis, even social media is blowing up over this.
Because it's so much bigger than just a personality clash. It raises all these serious questions about the U.S. and Ukraine and the future of the war and how the balance of power in the world is shifting.
Okay, so let's back up for a second. To understand what happened here, we need to remember Zelensky wasn't just there for a friendly visit. He was there to sign this deal for rare earth minerals. Basically, it would give the U.S. access to these super valuable resources that Ukraine controls.
Yeah, on the surface, it seemed like a win-win. U.S. gets these strategic resources, and Ukraine gets this badly needed economic boost.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of tension below the surface.
Yeah, because remember, Trump had literally just called Zelensky a dictator. And then there were those talks directly with Russia, completely cutting Ukraine out of the loop. It's not exactly a recipe for trust.
Exactly. So it makes Zelensky's initial optimism even more interesting. From what I've seen in the sources you sent, it seems like he genuinely thought Trump was on Ukraine's side and was expecting continued support from the U.S. But, get this, this meeting starts out pretty cordially. There's even footage of Trump and Zelensky making small talk about Zelensky's clothes, of all things.
I saw that. Yeah, Trump said something like, "You're dressed up today." It almost seemed casual. But then the whole mood shifts when Trump says he's in the middle when it comes to Russia and Ukraine.
Oh, yeah. That must have set off some serious alarm bells for Zelensky. I mean, here's the country that's been his biggest supporter suddenly saying they're neutral. And it sets the stage for what happens next, when Zelensky shows Trump photos of Ukrainian victims of the war.
It seemed like he was going for the empathy play, something that's worked for him on the world stage before, but this time it backfires completely.
Yeah, instead of sympathy. It seems to just make Trump frustrated. He even says, after these terrible things about Putin, how can I go to him and say, hey, Vladimir, let's make a deal?
No, okay, that's a pretty big escalation.
Yeah.
And then, to make matters worse, in walks J.D. Vance, the vice president, who is known for being critical of U.S. involvement in foreign conflicts.
Right. And Vance jumps right into the conversation, starts criticizing Zelensky for not showing enough gratitude for U.S. support, which just throws more fuel on the fire, and it basically becomes this three-way argument with accusations flurrying everywhere.
I mean, it's almost hard to believe this is happening in the Oval Office.
Yeah.
But it's all broadcast live. The whole world is watching this unfold.
Yeah. Vance accuses Zelensky of being disrespectful. Zelensky questions Vance's understanding of what's actually happening in Ukraine. Then Trump drops this bombshell. He says, you're gambling with World War III.
Wow. That's a huge statement, even for Trump. And the quotes from Zelensky, you can just tell how shocked he is. He says something like, please do you think if you just speak very loudly? He's like, he can't believe what he's hearing.
And Vance doubles down. He says, Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come to the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
Then Zelensky, trying to explain his side of things, says, you're in the middle. What do you mean? You have the ocean in the middle. It's not your land.
Yeah, and that's when the meeting completely falls apart. The fallout is immediate. Zelensky leaves without signing that rare earth minerals deal, which is about way more than just resources. It represents a strategic alliance, potentially giving the U.S. leverage against China. And then they cancel the press conference.
And as if to really drive the point home, Trump puts out this scathing statement on Truth Social. It's just a total breakdown of communication and diplomacy.
Yeah. And the global reaction to all this has been huge. Responses are coming in from all over the world. Should we take a look at that?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, it feels like the world just split in half after this. You've got European leaders, people like Macron, Tusk, von der Leyen.
Yeah.
They all come out showing support for Zelensky, condemning what Trump did.
Yeah, it really shows how divided the world is on this whole war. On the one hand, you've got Europe with this strong, unified message, we stand with Ukraine. But then you've got these big names in the U.S., like Senator Lindsey Graham, criticizing Zelensky.
Yeah, Graham's a big Trump guy. And he even said Zelensky should resign. Said Zelensky made it impossible for Trump to keep supporting Ukraine. It just shows how divided things are in U.S. politics. when it comes to this war.
Right, and then you can't forget about Putin and his allies. They're basically celebrating this whole thing, this very public fight between the U.S. and Ukraine. They see it as a win for them.
Which makes sense, right? It weakens the idea of a united West against Russia. And that could make Putin even more aggressive. It's kind of scary to think about.
Oh, absolutely. And when you look at how everyday people are reacting, it gets even more complicated. Social media was a complete mess after this meeting.
Oh, I bet. Everyone had an opinion.
Exactly. Some people saw it as Trump trying to humiliate Zelensky on purpose, like a power move, to force him into accepting a bad deal for Ukraine.
Which, knowing Trump, isn't that crazy of an idea?
Yeah, true. But other people saw it as just a clash of personalities and built up frustration. They point to Trump's skepticism about the U.S. being involved in Ukraine, his wanting to pull back from the conflict and make some kind of deal with Russia, even if it means making concessions.
It's interesting how even what Zelensky was wearing became a big deal. Trump makes this offhand comment about him being dressed up, and suddenly reporters are all over Zelensky, asking him why he's not in a suit.
It does seem like a small detail, but it became a symbol for some people. They saw it as disrespectful, maybe even that Zelensky wasn't taking the meeting seriously. But then others see it as a powerful statement. Zelensky's been wearing military clothes throughout the war. It's become like a symbol of his leadership and how tough he is.
So the same thing can mean totally different things, depending on how you feel about the whole situation. It's like every little detail of this meeting has been analyzed to death.
And that's the hard part, isn't it? Trying to see past all the drama, to understand what it all really means. So let's break it down. What does this tell us about how Trump handles foreign policy?
Well, we know he's never been a fan of the U.S. getting involved in other countries' conflicts. It's always America first with him, putting American interests above everything else.
And this meeting definitely seems to confirm that. He's clearly more interested in getting a deal with Russia, even if it puts Ukraine in danger. It's like he's saying the U.S. isn't going to support Ukraine forever.
What about Zelensky? I mean, he was publicly humiliated.
Yeah.
But he didn't back down from Trump at all.
No, he didn't. He stood up for himself, even with all that pressure. It was a bold move, refusing to compromise on what he believes in. But it's also risky.
How so?
He's basically hoping that the rest of the world, especially Europe, will put enough pressure on Trump to make him change his mind about Ukraine, whether that'll work or not. Well, that's the big question.
Yeah, it is. So where do we go from here? Is this it for U.S. support of Ukraine? Could this make the war even worse?
Those are the big questions. And it's too early to know for sure. There's still so much we don't know, like what happened behind closed doors, what deals might have been made.
Well, one thing's for sure.
Yeah.
The whole world is watching.
Yeah, and the stakes couldn't be higher. This whole thing has exposed some serious problems. It's going to take a lot of work to keep things from spiraling out of control.
So before we wrap this up, we want to leave you with something to think about. Imagine you're talking to Zelensky right now. What would you say to him? What advice would you give him?
And what about Trump? If you could talk to him, how would you try to change his mind?
These are tough questions, but they're the questions we all need to be asking. Because what happens next could change everything.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions. It's more important now than ever.
It's easy to get caught up in all the drama of this meeting. But we got to remember, this didn't just come out of nowhere. This clash between Zelensky and Trump, there's this whole bigger picture. The war in Ukraine, the U.S. and Russia, and China getting more and more powerful.
Exactly. This just makes an already bad situation even worse. It weakens the idea of a united West, which could make Russia and their allies bolder.
And we can't forget about the people in Ukraine. Millions of lives are at stake here. What happens will affect the entire world for years to come.
Yeah, it's a reminder of how fragile things are, how quickly relationships can change, and how even something that seems small can have huge consequences.
So what now? Is this the end of U.S. support for Ukraine? Could this make the war even worse?
Those are the big questions. And honestly, it's too early to know for sure. We still don't know everything that happened in that room, what they might have said to each other.
But one thing's for sure, the whole world is watching.
Yeah, and the stakes are incredibly high. This has revealed some deep cracks. It's going to take a lot of careful work to keep things from falling apart.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this, we want to leave you with something to think about. Imagine you're Zelensky. What would you say to him? What advice would you give him?
And what about Trump? If you could talk to him, what would you say? How would you try to change his mind?
These aren't easy questions, but they're the questions we need to be asking ourselves. What happens next could change the world.
So stay informed, stay engaged, keep asking those tough questions, because it matters now more than ever.
That's it for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another one. Until then, stay curious.